The ship that came out adrift toward them had no registration signal, no running lights, and no reason to be in that stretch of empty space except one. Voroshan's voice came through the ship wide, speaker flat, and quick. Prepare for contact. Non ostile posture. All crew to designated positions. All passengers to lower deck. Rail did not go to a designated position. He went to the passenger quarters first. He knocked twice, then opened the door without waiting because there was no time for waiting. The three families were already awake. The adults had the look of people who had been through enough trouble to recognize its early sounds. The children were less sure. Tali was sitting upright on her bunk with her knees pulled to her chest, watching the doorway, watching Rail. "I need the children in the galley storage room," he said. His voice was the same as it was when he told Dren dinner was ready. Even, unhurried. "Right now, please. Adults, stay in your quarters, lock the door. Do not open it for anyone until a crew member you recognize tells you it is clear." The parents looked at each other. One of the fathers started to ask something. "Please," Rail said. Not louder, just final. They moved and he walked the four children down through the lower corridor to the galley himself. One hand briefly on Tali's shoulder to keep her moving when she slowed to look at the emergency lights blinking in the ceiling. The storage room was cold and smelled of salt packs and sealed grain. It was also thick-walled, cargo-rated insulation, 2 layers of hull plating between it and open space that he got them inside. He found 2 spare work blankets on the upper shelf and passed them to the oldest of the 4 children, a boy of about 12 who was trying very hard to look steady. "Keep them warm," Rail said to the boy. "Keep them quiet. Keep this door shut." He looked at Tali last. She looked back at him with dark eyes that asked something she did not put into words. "I will come get you," he said. "When it is done. Me, not someone else. You wait for my knock." She nodded. He closed the door. Dren was in the corridor outside the galley when Rail came back through. His 4 eyes were wide, and his upper arms were gripping each other at the wrist. He was holding his post, but only barely. From the upper hull came the sound of a magnetic clamp engaging. A deep, structural groan that every spacefarer knew. They were being locked onto. Then the demand broadcast came through. "Come," Varani accented, bored in the way that men are bored when they have done a thing many times. "Surrender cargo manifest and passenger list. Cooperate fully and no crew will be harmed. Resistance will be handled." Rail reached past Dren and took the heavy kitchen ladle from the hook by the prep counter. He held it out. Dren stared at it. "That is a ladle. It is also the heaviest thing in this room." Rail pressed it into Dren's lower hands. "If someone comes through that door who is not me, you will know what to do with it." "I do not know what to do with it." "You will know," Rail said. "When the moment comes, you will know. Everyone does." He said it the way someone says a thing that they have seen be true too many times to argue with. Dren's grip tightened on the ladle handle. Then came the sound of the breach, a series of sharp mechanical beats as a whole entry point was forced. The pirates were inside the ship. Rail took off his apron that he folded it neatly and set it on the counter. Underneath, he was wearing a plain gray work shirt, sleeves already rolled to the elbows from the cooking, forearms bare. He looked at the prep counter for a moment and made one small choice, and then he walked to the galley doorway and looked down the corridor in the direction of the breach. Sounds 0.8 sets of boots. Maybe 9. He counted by the echo off the floor plating. He turned to Dren. "Lock the door after me. Do not open it." "Rail." Dren did not know what he wanted to say. "You do not have a weapon." Rail considered this the way a man considers a statement that is technically accurate, but somewhat beside the point. "Stay here," he said that he walked out into the corridor. The door sealed behind him. Dren stood in the middle of the galley holding a ladle and listening to footsteps going away from him, and then the footsteps stopped being something he could hear separately from his own heartbeat. He waited. From somewhere deeper in the ship, there were sounds he could not name. Not shouting, not weapons fire, just sounds short and purposeful and then gone. Then silence, then more silence. Dren looked at the ladle. He looked at the door. He did not open it. He waited. The fish was already dead, but Rail Doss treated it with respect anyway. He worked the blade along the spine in one slow, clean pull. No wasted movement. No second guessing. The knife went exactly where he decided it would go, and it did not go anywhere else. The fillet came away whole, pale, and clean, and he set it down on the board with the same care another man might use setting down a sleeping child. Drin stood in the galley doorway and watched. He had been standing there for almost 3 minutes. He was young, for an Ixaly, barely past his second molt, and his upper 2 arms were folded across his chest the way his kind did when they were thinking hard about something. His lower arms hung at his sides. His 4 eyes tracked the knife. Nobody cut like that. Not the cargo haulers. Not the dock workers who sometimes rode the pale margin between stations. Drin had watched soldiers once, real ones, Verni Border Patrol loading up at a refueling stop, and even they had not moved the way this man moved. There was no performance in it. No awareness of being watched. Rail DOS simply worked, and the knife simply went where it was supposed to go, and that was the end of the matter. "You want something?" Rail asked. Without looking up, Drin straightened. "No, I was just passing. You have been just passing for 3 minutes." Drin's lower arms shifted. The cutting. It is very precise. Fish don't taste better if you hack at them. Rail turned the fillet and began removing the pin bones with 2 fingers and the tip of the blade, feeling for each one before drawing it out. "You eat yet?" "I was going to." "Sit down, then." Drin sat on the low stool near the prep counter. He watched Rail move around the small galley with the same economy he brought to everything, reaching for things before he seemed to look for them, setting the pan at the right temperature without testing it, adding spices in quantities that he did not measure but that Drin had never once seen produce a bad result. "How long have you been a cook?" Drin asked. "Long enough." Before that, Rail glanced at him. It was a brief glance, not unfriendly, but it had a kind of weight to it, like the question had been filed somewhere and acknowledged without being answered. "Before that I did other work," Rail said. He plated the fish and set it in front of Drin without ceremony. Then he started a second portion, smaller, which he did not plate, but instead wrapped in a cloth kept warm near the heating panel. "Who is that for?" Drin asked. "The girl." Drin did not need to ask which girl. There were 3 refugee families aboard the Pale Margin, 9 adults and 4 children, all of them displaced from a colony that had stopped being a colony 6 weeks ago. The children were all quiet in the way that children become quiet when they have seen too much too fast. All of them except the small one, Tali, 9 years old, brown-haired, missing 1 front tooth, who had apparently decided on her second day aboard that Rail Doss was the most interesting person on the ship and had been following him like a shadow ever since. Rail had not encouraged it. He had also not discouraged it. He had simply let her sit on the tall stool near the dry goods shelf and talk, and he had listened, and sometimes he had asked her a question, and she had talked more. This seemed to be enough for both of them. Drin watched him wrap the parcel and thought that there was something careful in the way he did it. Not sentimental, just careful. "Captain wants the crew dinner pushed up 30 minutes tonight," Drin said. "We are running an adjusted transit schedule." "I know. Already adjusted." "She said to let you know in case." "I know," Rail said again, not unkindly. "Tell her it is handled." Drin ate his fish. It was very good. It was always very good. He was trying to think a way to ask more questions without seeming to ask questions when the door on the far side of the galley opened and Galt came through, which took a moment because Galt was a Brule and Brules required a moment to fit through most doorways. Galt was the ship's engineer. He was dark-scaled and wide-shouldered and spoke less than Rail did, which was remarkable. He crossed to the water supply, filled his canteen, and was turning to leave when he stopped and looked at Rail's hands. Rail was breaking down the bones of the second fish carcass. His hands worked fast without rushing. The joints separated cleanly from the cartilage. His thumb found the soft spots by memory. Galt watched for 4 seconds. Then he looked at Drin. Then he looked back at Rail. He made a sound low in his chest that was not quite a word in any language Drin knew. And he left. Drin looked at his plate. What did that mean? No idea. Rail said he was already starting the next task, his back to Drin, the knife moving in his hand like it had always been there and always would be 10 minutes later the proximity alert sounded. 1 short tone, then 2 long ones. Unregistered contact. Closing distance. Rail set the knife down on the board. He dried his hands on a cloth, slowly and completely, the way a man does when he wants his hands to be perfectly dry. Then he looked out the small porthole above the sink at the black between stars. He did not look afraid. He looked like he was remembering something. Two of Sevic's scouts did not come back, that he gave them 6 minutes past their check-in window before he accepted what the silence meant. Not equipment failure, not a missed signal. Sevic had done enough of this to know the difference between men who were late and men who were gone. He pulled the remaining 6 into a tighter formation and moved them toward the cargo corridor. Whatever was in the dark ahead of them, it was not panicking. Panic things made noise. This made no noise at all. Rail crouched in the narrow service passage that ran along the port side of the ship, the kind of corridor meant for maintenance crawls and not much else. His back was against the wall. His breathing was controlled, in through the nose, out slow, the way it had been taught to him a long time ago on a different world with different problems. His hands were steadied. He had not always been a cook. He had been other things first, and the last of the other things had been a field medic attached to a human frontier unit during a stretch of years that he did not discuss at dinner tables. Frontier medics were not like other medics. Other medics waited at the back with clean hands and good lighting. Frontier medics went in first because the wounded were where the fighting was, and the fighting was always at the front. He had learned anatomy the useful way. Not from diagrams, but from urgency. He knew what held a body together and what let it come apart. And he knew it for humans, and for Varani, and for Brule, and for half a dozen other species he had worked alongside or worked against. Depending on the year, he had patched more bodies than he could count. He knew every soft place, every pressure point, every junction of nerve and vessel that mattered. He knew this the way a cook knows a kitchen, not by thinking about it, but by feel. The 2 scouts had found him near the forward junction. They had made assumptions. They had made them quickly, and they had not had time to correct them. Rail moved out of the service passage and continued toward the sound of boots. He was not angry. He was not afraid. He was doing a thing that needed doing, and he was being careful because careless people made noise and noise caused problems. He had been told once, early in his service, that the most dangerous soldier was not the largest or the most aggressive, but the one who was comfortable with discomfort. The one who could take a bad situation and simply work inside it until the situation changed. He had understood that at 22. He understood it better now. Galt was in the engine corridor when Rail passed through. The big Brule was standing beside a secondary panel with a length of heavy hydraulic cable looped over one shoulder. He looked at Rail. He looked at the state of Rail's sleeves. He looked at Rail's face that he moved sideways without being asked and pointed one thick finger toward the aft section. Rail nodded. Galt said nothing. He had known, Rail realized, since the galley, since watching the bones come apart under Rail's hands. Galt had spent his life around machinery, and machinery did not lie about what it was built for, and neither did hands that moved a certain way. Rail had not asked for his help. He was grateful for the direction. He found 2 more of Sevic's crew near the aft storage junction. These 2 were smarter than the first. They were positioned well, covering each other's angles. One of them spotted Rail before Rail was in position. The next 40 seconds were not clean. Rail took a hit to his left side, a glancing strike from an armored elbow that would leave a bruise like a boot print. He filed the pain in the part of his mind that dealt with information that was noted but not acted upon, and he finished what he had started. He was breathing harder when it was done. Not much harder. But he straightened up, rolled his neck once until something clicked, and looked at the 2 men on the floor. They were alive. He had been specific about that. Dead men created complications that sleeping men did not. He continued forward to the junction leading to the main cargo hold. He stopped and listened. Boots, multiple sets, and voices, Sevic's, recognizable from the broadcast, carrying the flat authority of a man who expected to be obeyed. And under the voices, quieter, the controlled breathing of people who were frightened but trying not to show it. The crew, Vorashan, and whoever Sevic had managed to collect. Rail stood in the junction and did the math. For men, with Sevic by the sound of it, possibly a 5th near the door. The hold itself was wide and badly lit, good cover for people who knew where the cover was. He looked down at his hands. His right sleeve had something on it that he did not examine closely. He rolled it down. Fastened the cuff. Did the same on the left side. Then he walked toward the cargo hold door, and when he reached it, he did not hesitate. He pulled it open and stepped inside, hands open, arms slightly out, making himself as readable as a man could make himself. Sevik turned from where he stood over Captain Vorashan and looked at the graying human in the plain gray shirt who had just walked in from the dark. He tilted his head. "Who are you?" Sevik asked. Rail looked at him the way he had looked at the fish. Calm, measuring, already deciding. "I am the cook," he said. Sevik looked at Rail the way a person looks at something that does not quite fit the category they put it in. He looked at him for 2 full seconds, which, for a Varani commander who made fast judgments and trusted them, was a long time. Then he almost smiled. "The cook," he said. "Yes. You walked in here." The door was not locked. Sevik glanced at the man nearest to him. The man's grip shifted on his weapon, but he did not raise it. There was something about the way the human stood that made automatic responses feel slightly uncertain. He was not in a fighting stance. He was not cowering. He was simply standing in a room the way furniture stands in a room, already belonging there. Captain Vorashan was kneeling on the floor near the cargo stacks with her hands behind her head. Beside her were 3 other crew members, all in the same position. Her 6 eyes moved to Rail once, and then went back to the middle distance, which was how Vorashan handled situations she had not yet found a solution to. Sevik took 1 slow step toward Rail. 4 of my crew are not responding. I noticed there was some trouble, Rail said. You noticed? In the corridors. I heard something. Sevik was quiet for a moment. He was a tall man, long-necked in the Varani way, with pale gray skin and the careful movements of someone who stayed dangerous by staying controlled. He studied Rail's face and found nothing useful in it. No fear, no aggression, no obviasanga. What is a cook doing in this part of the ship, he asked. Looking for crew members, Rail said. We were supposed to have dinner an hour ago. One of the other pirates, younger, less patient, made a short sound that was almost a laugh. Sevik did not look at him. His eyes stayed on Rail. Where are the passengers? Sevik asked. I do not know, Rail said. I have been in the galley. We will search again. I imagine you will. Sevik tilted his head again. The thing about this human was not any single feature of him. It was the accumulation, the rolled down sleeves, the even breathing, the way his eyes moved around the hold. Not nervous, not scanning for exits, just noticing. The way a man notices a room when he has already decided what he is going to do in it and is simply confirming the details. Sevik had met a handful of people in his career who were genuinely dangerous. None of them had announced it. They were recognizable by the same quality this man had. A kind of completeness. Nothing wasted. Nothing extra that he made a decision. Restrain him. For men moved toward Rail. Rail waited until they were committed to their approach, until the angles were what he needed them to be, and then he moved. What followed lasted less than 30 seconds at IT was not elegant. Rail was in his mid-40s with a healed fracture in his right wrist and a left knee that complained about cold weather. He was not fast the way young men were fast. He was fast the way experienced men were fast, which is a different thing entirely. It is knowing what is going to happen before it happens and being in the right place for it rather than reacting after the fact. He did not put any of the 4 men down for good. He was particular about that, but he put them down completely, and they did not get back up on any schedule that would affect him. When it was finished, he was standing 2 meters from where he had started. His breathing had changed. His left side ached where the bruise from earlier was making its opinion known. The remaining crew members were staring at him. Vorashan had not moved from her position, but every one of her 6 eyes was on him now, and they had a different quality than they'd had before. Not shock. Something more like recognition, delayed but arriving. Sevik had not moved either. He stood near the cargo stacks with one hand near his weapon and the expression of a man recalculating. Cook, he said quietly. Yes, Rail said. Who sent you here? Rail looked at him. Nobody sends me anywhere. Then what? Rail thought about Tali in the cold storage room with her knees pulled to her chest, waiting for his knock. He thought about the boy holding the blankets for the younger ones. He thought about what Sevik's manifest said he did with passengers he collected. He did not say any of this. You should let them go, Rail said. The crew. They are not part of this. Sevic's hand moved to his weapon. And if I do not, then we continue, Rail said, as simply as he might say, and then we add the salt. Sevic studied him for a moment longer. Then he raised the weapon and fired. Rail had already moved left. The shot caught the outer edge of his right shoulder and spun him half a step to the side. He found his footing. He was still standing. He looked at Sevic. His face had not changed. Sevic, for the first time since boarding the pale margin, looked like he was not sure how the next 10 minutes were going to go. That was the correct feeling to have. Rail crossed the distance between them. Sevic was good. Rail gave him that he was trained, composed, and fast in the way Veronese soldiers were fast, efficient, angular, very little wasted energy. Under other circumstances, against most opponents, he would have been more than enough. He was not enough. Rail was not larger. He was not faster. He was older and hurt and running on whatever reserves a man finds when there is nothing left to lose except the thing he is protecting. But he had been in rooms like this before, with men like this before, in years he did not talk about over dinner. And the thing about surviving those rooms was that you learned exactly one lesson, and you learned it so deep it became part of the body. You did not stop. That was the whole lesson. Everything else was details. You did not stop, because the moment you stopped was the moment the other man had space to reset and regroup and become a problem again. You kept moving, you kept pressure, you stayed inside the distance where skill mattered less than weight and will, and you did not stop. Sevic hit him 3 times. Good hits. Rail registered each one and did not fall. The last exchange ended against the side of the cargo stacks. Sevic went down on one knee. Rail put him the rest of the way down and held him there until the resistance went out of him. He stood up slowly. His right shoulder had gone partly numb from the weapon hit, which was useful in the short term and would be a problem later. His ribs on the left side were sending detailed complaints upward that he was not ready to examine, yet he breathed. Once, twice, the hold was quiet. Vorashan was on her feet. Drin did not know when she had moved. He was standing in the doorway behind Rail because he had not been able to stay in the galley. He had come to the door of the hold and watched the last of it through the gap. And now he was inside, and his 4 eyes were very wide, and he was still holding the ladle. The remaining 2 pirates were standing near the far wall. They had not run. They were professionals, and professionals did not run. But they had put their weapons on the floor without being asked, which was a reasonable choice given the available information. Galt came through the side door of the hold. He had the hydraulic cable from earlier and a set of the heavy cargo clamps used to lock down freight containers. He crossed the room without urgency and began securing the down men with a thoroughness that suggested he had thought about the measurements in advance. Rail watched him work for a moment. Then he looked at Vorashan. She looked back at him. 6 eyes, all of them steady now. "Cook," she said. He almost said yes. Instead, he said, "Are you hurt?" "No." She glanced at his shoulder. "You are." "I know. The passenger's safe. Lower galley storage." He paused. Sevic had more crew on the upper deck, near the ship connection point. They will need to be handled before we call this done. Vorashan was already moving. She touched the crew members who had been kneeling beside her, directed them with quick gestures. They went. She had her ship back under her, or she was in the process of taking it back, which was close enough to the same thing. Dren had not moved from just inside the doorway. He was looking at Rail with an expression Rail recognized. He had seen it before, on young crew members, on soldiers who were new, on anyone who watched something happen that rearranged the way they understood the world. Not fear, not admiration, something quieter. The specific look of a person revising a category. "You said you were the cook," Dren said. "I am the cook." "That is not." Dren stopped. Started again. "That is not all you are." Rail looked at the ladle in Dren's lower hands. "Did you stay in a galley?" Dren hesitated. "Mostly. Close enough." Rail moved toward the door. "Come on." They walked back through the ship together, through the corridor with the blinking emergency lights, through the galley, to the storage room door. Rail stopped in front of it. He knocked twice. His specific knock. Then he waited 0.3 seconds. 5. The door opened. Tali came out first because she was closest to the door, which meant she had been standing right at it and had probably been standing there for a long time. She crossed the distance between them in 2 steps and put both arms around Rail's middle and pressed her face against his chest. Rail put his right hand on the back of her head. His arm was stiff, and his shoulder was a problem, but the arm went where he put it. He stood there. Behind Tali, the other 3 children filed out. The 12-year-old boy had done his job. The blankets were folded. His face was tired, but intact. Dren stood in the corridor and watched Rail's hand on the back of the girl's head and the particular stillness of a large and damaged man who had found the thing he came back for. He looked down at the ladle. He felt suddenly that he understood the thing Gaul had understood in the galley watching Rail break down the fish carcass. He could not have put it into words, but it sat in his chest now, and it was heavy and certain. He set the ladle quietly on the counter and did not say anything, because there was nothing to say that the room was not already saying. The soup was ready before anyone thought to ask for it. That was how Rail worked. The situation was handled, or handling itself. The authorities had been contacted. Sevik and his crew were secured in the cargo hold with Galt sitting on a crate outside the door, reading a technical manual like he had nothing better to do, and Rail was in the galley making soup. His shoulder had been wrapped. He had done it himself, one-handed, with the medical kit he kept under the prep counter because ships this size did not always have someone qualified to handle field dressing, and someone had to. The wrapping was tighter than a physician would have approved of and exactly tight enough to do the job. He stirred the pot. The ship moved slowly through the dark, limping on reduced thrust toward the nearest station. The lights back to normal, the emergency tone finally silenced. Vora Shan came in alone. She sat on the stool across the counter from him. Dren's stool, the one that faced the prep area, and she set both pairs of hands flat on the surface and looked at him without opening a subject. He let her look. "How long were you in?" she asked finally. Rail kept stirring. 22 years. Kumba. Adjacent to it. She accepted that. Ixaly understood the margins of war. Her species had been managing a disputed border system for 4 generations. "Why did you leave?" He was quiet for a moment. The soup moved slowly under the spoon. "I got tired," he said, "of putting people back together just to send them out again." Vorashan was quiet. One of her middle eyes tracked the steam rising from the pot. "Why cooking?" she asked. "Same work," he said. "Different results." She looked at him. That sat with her in a way she did not express and did not need to. She was a practical woman, and practical people sometimes understood a thing fully without announcing it. "Your position on this ship is permanent," she said. "If you want it." He glanced at her. "I will think about it." She nodded once, stood, and left. She did not say thank you. Rail respected that. Thank you was for small things. Some things were too large for it, and both parties knew it, and the knowing was enough. Dren came next. He sat where Vora had sat and folded his upper arms and looked at the counter for a moment before speaking. "I want to learn," he said. Rail looked at him. "Navigation? You are already cooking." Dren looked up. His 4 eyes were steady. "I want to learn to cook." Rail studied him. The ladle. The storage room door. The long night of waiting with a piece of kitchen equipment in his hands. Staying at his post because a quiet man in a gray shirt had told him to, and had said he would know what to do when the moment came. He pulled a small knife from the block near the board. A paring knife, light, easy to control. He set it in front of Dren handle first. "Tomorrow," he said. "First we do breakfast. You watch." Dren looked at the knife. He picked it up carefully. "Good," Rail said. He went back to the soup. Tali's mother found him an hour later, when the soup was going out to the crew tables and the passengers were eating with them because Rail had told Vora it made sense and Vora had agreed. The woman stood in the doorway the way Dren had stood in it the first day, except she was not watching the knife. She was watching Rail. He looked at her. She opened her mouth, closed it. Her eyes were bright, and she pressed her lips together and tried again, and what came out was not words, but it was enough. "There," Rail said. She laughed. It was a short, wet sound that was almost a sob and then tipped over into something better. "Yes," she said. "Please." He made her tea. He made it the way he made everything, without measuring, without fuss, already knowing. She sat and drank it, and they did not talk much, but she stopped shaking by the time the cup was empty, and that was the point. Galt passed the galley doorway once during the evening. He glanced in at Rail. He made the same low sound he had made the first day, the one in no language Dren knew, and moved on. Rail thought that one had a meaning after all. He thought it meant, I knew it. He thought it might also mean good. Later, when the ship had settled into its slow transit rhythm and the passengers were asleep and the crew was moving through their quiet night rotations, Rail was alone in the galley. He cleaned the counter. He put the pots away. He checked the stores for tomorrow. Then he stood at the board and picked up the big knife. His knife, the old one, heavy and balanced and worn smooth on the handle from years of use. He turned it once in his hand. The edge caught the galley light that he had carried this knife through 6 postings for planetary reassignments and 12 years of cooking on ships that ranged from terrible to adequate to once genuinely good. It had broken down more fish than he could count. It had done other work too, in rooms that no longer existed, for people who were no longer around to ask him about it. He set it down on the board. He looked out the porthole above the sink. The stars were moving slowly past, the way they always did when a ship was underway, steady and indifferent and enormous and everywhere. He was just a cook. He had always been just a cook. What that meant, nobody had ever thought to ask the right question to find out. He turned off the galley light and went to sleep.